Okay, the mute is off.
Okay, wait, I have to say, okay, now.
Put the mute on?
Yeah, put your mute on. I just have to be the last person.
What is a skeptic?
What is a skeptic?
Skepticism has a long historical tradition dating back to the ancient Greeks, like when the philosopher Socrates observed,
All I know is that I know nothing. What happened to the Parthenon?
Of course, that kind of know-nothing skepticism is just silly. If you were skeptical about everything, you'd have to be skeptical about your own skepticism.
Is it just me, or has he not really said anything yet?
Modern skepticism is embodied in the scientific method. It's about gathering data and testing claims made about natural phenomena.
That's phenomenal.
But a claim becomes a fact only when it is confirmed by investigation and observation to such an extent that reason demands our temporary agreement.
Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. We test, observe, and confirm claims, then they become facts, and we're done. That's easy. I can do that.
Well, not so fast. All facts in science are provisional. That means they're subject to challenge, and ultimately, even to change.
Oh boy, here we go.
That means skepticism is a method leading to provisional conclusions.
Oh, I am getting such a headache.
Proper skepticism begins with a mind open to the possibility that the claim could be true. We just need to see the compelling evidence that the claim is true before we believe it.
Okay, that actually sounds fairly reasonable.
And when claims have been tested and the results are inconclusive, we withhold judgment and continue to formulate hypotheses and theories until we gather the evidence needed to reach a provisional conclusion.
Okay.
The key to skepticism is to continually and vigorously apply the methods of science in order to navigate between know-nothing skepticism and believe-everything credulity.
Credulity.
That just means being too eager to believe everything anyone says.
Eager. E-A-G-E-R, is that?
Eager just means wanting to do or have something very much.
I don't believe you, nor am I eager to do so.
Well, welcome to our second online salon, a cooperation between the Düsseldorfer Aufklärungsdienst and the Giordano-Bruno Foundation. We are very excited about today's guest, Dr. Michael Shermer, whom I am going to introduce to you in a minute, but first, some important remarks. This is a live event, and we're going to have a Q&A in the second half of this evening. So you have the opportunity to submit questions either in the YouTube live chat or using the email address that you can find in the info box. Your questions will be collected by our team, Chris and Andrea. Say a quick hello.
Hi.
The Q&A later will be led by Davina, who's in the studio today. She'll pose your questions to Michael. Hello, Davina.
Hello.
But without further ado, let me introduce our guest who joins us all the way from the United States. Dr. Michael Shermer is one of the most prominent figures in the modern skeptic and humanist movements. He's not only the founder of the Skeptic Society and editor-in-chief of Skeptic magazine, but also teaches Skepticism 101 at Chapman University. For 18 years, he was a contributor to Scientific American and now hosts the Science Salon podcast. He's the author of several best-selling books, including Why People Believe Weird Things, The Moral Arc, and Heavens on Earth. His latest book, and the subject of this evening's talk, is titled Giving the Devil His Due, Reflections of a Scientific Humanist. It's a collection of articles and essays on a wide range of fascinating and at times quite controversial topics. So Michael, we're thrilled to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. And we're very much looking forward to hearing more about your new book. Hi.
Nice to see you all. And I was supposed to be there in person, but due to circumstances beyond our control, the world is engulfed in a pandemic. So here we are. And this could... Actually, I've been doing quite a few of these, and it's nice not to have to get on a plane and travel for 14 hours to get there. I have to admit, I don't miss that part.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And I think we're all ready for you, so the floor is yours.
Okay. So the first part, you'd like me to just kind of summarize the book and talk about what the issues are, and then we'll go to Q&A?
Yes, please. That's exactly the plan.
Okay. And then about how long should I go for? Because I can adjust it.
Well, however long you want to. Like.
Okay. I'll keep it under 3 hours. No.
Wonderful.
Well, here's the book. It's called Giving the Devil His Due, and you have the little chess piece with the little in shadow devil there. So the devil is whoever you disagree with, whoever disagrees with you, you don't like, you find their views disagreeable or abhorrent or hateful. You find their speech hate speech, anything like that. The title comes from, and I'll just read you the portion from the book, from Robert Bolt's 1960 play, A Man for All Seasons, based on the true story of the 16th century Chancellor of England, Sir Thomas More, and his collision with King Henry VIII over the monarch's divorce from Catherine of Aragon. In the play, a dialogue unfolds between More and his future son-in-law, Roper, over the changing of the law. Roper urges him to arrest a man whose testimony could condemn More to death, even though no laws were broken. And More says, and go he should if he were the devil himself until he broke the law. And Roper says, so now you give the devil benefit of the law? And More says, yes, what would you do? Cut a great road through the law to get after the devil? And Roper says, I'd cut down every law in England to do that. And More says, oh, and when the law was down and the devil turned around on you, where would you hide? The laws all being flat. Yes, I'd give the devil benefit of law for my own safety's sake. So that's where the title comes from. And the argument is that the moment you sign off on censorship, that some people should be censored because their speech is hateful or threatening or disagreeable or whatever, and you're in the majority, what happens when you're in the minority? What happens when it's your voice that's crying out in the wilderness against the dogma, against the authorities, against the accepted paradigm? And now there's no protections for you. So that's why I say, for our own safety's sake, we should give the devil his due, because you might be that person at some point. So then I go through all the arguments for why we should listen to what other people have to say, even though we disagree with them. This is kind of a rehashing of John Stuart Mill's 1859 book on liberty, in which, and sort of in my own words, why should I engage with somebody else? Why shouldn't we silence other people? Because first of all, even if you're completely right and you know the other person's wrong, you have an opportunity to improve your own arguments, to strengthen your own case. As Mill said, he who knows only his own side of the argument doesn't even know that. So by way of example, my students at Chapman University are pretty liberal, so they're mostly pro-choice on the abortion issue. And so when I asked them, what's the best arguments on the other side? What do the pro-lifers argue, and what's your counter? Most of them have no idea what the pro-life arguments are. They've never heard them, or they don't pay attention, or they just say something like, oh, Republicans just hate women. It's like, no, that's not an argument. That may be, you may think that, you want to impugn motives to them, but that's not what they're arguing. So I have them watch a Ben Shapiro video in which Ben argues for the pro-life position, and he's pretty good. He makes some pretty good arguments. So even though I disagree with him, and I think I could beat Ben in a debate on abortion, I have to say his arguments are good. And now my pro-choice position is all the stronger because I know what the counter arguments are and I could counter them, right? And this is true for pretty much anything. Like in my chapters on creationism or Holocaust denial, my engaging with those people, creationists and Holocaust deniers, strengthened my knowledge of and arguments for evolution and that the Holocaust happened, or how anything in the past happened. How do we know? How do scientists deal with the history of something when you can't put it in a lab? It's already happened. So knowing what the counter arguments are strengthens your own position. Now, that's not to say to understand evolution, you have to engage the creationists. I'm just saying that's what happened with me. And that's another reason why we should do that. Second, maybe you're partially right and partially wrong. And by engaging with somebody else who disagrees with you, you have a chance to correct your errors and steer the ship in the right direction a little more. Maybe you're completely wrong. You've gone off the rails. You have some whack job idea about I don't know, let's say COVID-19 is caused by 5G towers or something like this, right? Even that, as goofy as that sounds, there's a lot of people that actually believe that. So it's not enough to just say that's a crazy conspiracy theory. If you can't articulate why it's wrong, that the energy coming from these towers is not enough to break the chemical bonds in DNA to cause mutations and therefore cancer, or whatever the argument is, to weaken the immune system and so forth. So if you can't counter that, how good is your scientific knowledge of COVID-19 in that case? So, and then 4 or 5, wherever I was on the list, it's not just the right of the speaker to speak; it's the right of the listener to listen. That is, let's say a college campus brings a controversial speaker on campus, and a lot of people want to hear what this person has to say. Kind of the type specimen here is some conservative is invited to give a talk at a U.S. university, which are notoriously pretty liberal, and students go crazy. They have paroxysms of protests. They either get the speaker disinvited or they employ what's called the heckler's veto, in which they shout and scream and bring party noisemakers and chant, and so that the speaker can't give his talk. They think this is a great victory, but in fact, it not only harms the speaker, more importantly, it interferes with the rights of the audience to hear. Most people come to hear what this person has to say, even if they disagree with him. And so that's really it. Again, just for your own safety's sake, to correct your errors, to strengthen your own arguments. Those are the best arguments for free speech. And the last few weeks have been a real test for my hypothesis that is a radical defender of free speech. Let everybody have their say. What about Alex Jones on Joe Rogan spouting some crazy idea that Sandy Hook was a false flag operation? Sandy Hook is the school massacre. Or more recently, I was on this show called London Real with Brian Rose, and he had just had on this guy named David Icke. Now, I knew Icke back in the day because I had read a lot of his theories about, aliens. Not only do aliens exist, they're here. And they're in the United States. They live in the underground in the deserts of New Mexico, and they're running the world. And so it's like, this is a pretty goofy idea. And, but I don't care if he wants to spout those ideas. I mean, they're just words, right? Well, now he's on, but the week before I was on, he was on there talking about 5G and COVID-19. And he thinks the whole COVID-19 is much ado about nothing. It's just sort of like the common cold or the flu, and that all this is some kind of covert operation on the part of big tech companies and big pharma. Anyway, he went on and on for hours. First of all, he's way more articulate than he appears in his writings. Of course, to Americans, anybody with a British accent, that automatically elevates the quality of the argument, I guess. But then that episode got kicked off YouTube. They took it down. So it's like, why? It's dangerous. They didn't call it hate speech. They called it, dangerous speech because it's dispersing misinformation about COVID-19. Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's what I think. But so what? What if he's right? What if he's partially right? In any case, what if it isn't David Icke, who's way out here on the extremes? What if it's somebody who's like just 10% away from the mainstream of science? Maybe this person actually is onto something. In the moment you start, censoring the people out here, and then you kind of bring it in more and more and more and more, and pretty soon you're picking off the people that may actually have a contribution to the conversation. And the reason is this is the sort of the deeper reason behind all free speech, is we're not omniscient. Nobody is omniscient. Even Dr. Fauci is not a deity. He doesn't know everything. There is so much we still don't know about the novel coronavirus. In part, that's why it's called a novel coronavirus. And, for weeks I've been tweeting out about, it's not a bioweapon. It came from this wet lab. It's a derivative of a bat virus. Coronaviruses are common. 1/3 of all common colds are coronaviruses. Bats are mammals. Bats live in these massive caves with, millions and millions of members, just like humans. And, this DNA analysis published in the prestigious journal Nature Medicine showed that it's 98% similar to a bat virus and so on. Well, just this last week or so, there's been, half a dozen studies showing that no, it looks like it's been around longer than, say, late December, probably back to October. And that the mutation rate of the virus shows that it probably did not originate at the wet market. It was already in existence, already contaminating people by the time it got to the wet market. So the wet market and the bat, eating the bats and so on, it was just a catalyst to push it out. It was already there. Now, where did it come from? Well, we still don't know this. Anyway, I don't want to go off on a big diatribe about COVID-19. But my point is that we don't know a lot about it. And so you have to let all the voices have their say. And the moment you start screening people, who's going to decide what's within the acceptable window of conversation? Sometimes it's called the Overton window. That is to say, what's acceptable to talk about and what's not. Like in America, it's not acceptable to talk about race and IQ differences, racial group differences in IQ scores. This is just verboten, even though they're real and everybody that studies it knows that they're real and there's debate about what the cause is and so on. You can't really even talk about it. So that's outside the Overton window. And I'm claiming this is a big mistake. There should be no window. Just let everybody have their say. And so that's been something of a test for me the last few weeks, because it's easy for someone like Facebook or Twitter to say, okay, look, this, there's a line from somebody posting a tweet to misinformation, to fake news, to all of a sudden people aren't getting vaccinated or they're not socially isolating in the case of COVID-19. And then that's a risk to public health. So, the chain of logic is internally coherent, but the problem again is that once you open up that category of, I'm going to decide what's hate speech or dangerous speech, then that puts too much responsibility on one person. So let me say something, since this is in the news this week, about what social media companies are. Now, in the United States anyway, publishers, like the publisher of the New York Times, book publishers like companies that publish my books and other big New York firms, they are publishing companies responsible for what they publish. So they have fact checkers, they edit their articles very carefully, they vet them. Most people that submit articles to the New York Times, for example, op-ed pieces, they are rejected. Either they're not interested, it's not relevant, they're poorly written, they're not fact-checked, or they're incorrect. So publishers make decisions, editorial decisions about what content they're going to put out. And if they libel somebody, for example, saying something that's untrue, that harms them financially in their career or personally in their personal lives, they can be sued. They can be held accountable, and they have been many times. Okay, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, so on, social media companies, they have always argued, we're not publishers. We are like the public park that everybody owns. It's like just a big public forum. Anybody could say anything, like the famous Hyde Park in London. Every nut job gets out there and with the bullhorn and talks about, what they believe and their political positions or whatever. The city of London can't be sued for something somebody says at Hyde Park, right? It's just kind of a public forum. Anybody can post anything, as it were. Now, the problem is we are now, right now, this week, the moment that Twitter said, we're going to fact check Donald Trump's tweets. Okay, I understand why they want to do this. He's a loose cannon. He shoots off, he tweets. I don't know when the guy sleeps or has a personal relationship with his wife. He just tweets all day and all night. It's like, dude, take a break. Okay, but there he is, so they decided, okay, we got to flag his tweets. One of them was on kind of threatening violence to looters. As you know, we're going through a massive week here of rioting and looting over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So, things are pretty heated right now. So they decided, okay, we're going to tag Trump's tweets as, inciting violence that's against our code, our accepted standards. Okay. All right. Now, if they're going to start making editorial decisions about who gets to post and what they get to post, they should be treated as a publisher. Now you're responsible for what people put on there. But this isn't like the New York Times getting, I don't know, a couple of dozen op-ed submissions a day or whatever they get. Maybe it's 100 a day. Facebook and Twitter, they get, I don't know, 100 million posts a day. So, how in the world could they possibly police, edit, censor, fact check? They can't. It can't be done. So really, I would even say, as much as I'm a critic of Trump, and fact checking is one of the best things that's ever happened to journalism. And since 2016, the rise of these fact checking sites like PolitiFact and Snopes, and to a lesser extent, Skeptic, my own skeptic.com, this is good. This is, countering bad speech with better speech, or fake news with real news, or alternative facts with real facts. This is how we should combat it. But the problem is that the moment a public platform, almost like a public trust, like a water company or electricity company, the moment they go down that road, now they're responsible. And I'm not sure that, Zuckerberg wants to be financially responsible for everything anybody says on his platform, because they'd get sued 100 times a day for libel, nothing else, because how nasty social media is. Anyway, I've kind of gone off on a little bit of a sidetrack, but this is central to the argument about this free speech. How far are we going to let it go, right? I start the book at, so this is kind of where it all began, this idea of censoring speech because it's dangerous. And so I take it back on page 1. I start with the Supreme Court case in 1919 of Schank versus the United States. So Charles Schank was the head of the Socialist Party of Philadelphia, and he was arrested and convicted for inciting violence, for treason, for threatening the security of the United States. Wow, what did this guy do? And I'll read. First of all, I'll read you Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes's famous decision. The lines will be familiar to you, upholding the conviction of Charles Schank. The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. So, falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater that leads to a panic creates a clear and present danger. Okay, what did this guy do that was the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater that presented a clear and present danger to the United States of America? He was distributing flyers to draft-age men in 1917 when the United States was entering the First World War against your country. And this was, in his words, a form of conscription. That is, conscription, the draft, which is forced entry into the military, is a form of slavery. And that's in violation of the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits slavery, and the 14th Amendment, which guarantees your right to bodily autonomy. No one can control your body. And these were all, of course, in response to the post-Civil War slavery, abolition of slavery. So he was saying that the U.S. government cannot just say, we now own your body for the next 2 or 4 years. We're putting you in the army. We're sending you off to Europe, and you may die. Too bad. That's what we need to do. Okay, now it's a debatable point whether the draft is a good thing or a bad thing. My point is that how is that hate speech? How is that dangerous speech? And the moment you set up that category, that bin, this is a bin of anything that goes in here, we're going to call a clear and present danger to our nation, and therefore we have to silence you and even jail you for this. That category, with concept creep, that category just gets bigger and bigger. The bin just grows in size, as pretty much anybody could find something that somebody else says that they don't like that would be classified as a clear and present danger, and down it goes. And even Holmes himself, decades later, said that was a big mistake. I went too far on that, because he could see what was happening. Just everybody and their brother was convicting people in the government, convicting private citizens for things that they said, is you could always make a case that this is a danger to the United States, a danger to our country, a threat, and so forth. And as we know, autocrats throughout history have always used that as an excuse to silent dissenters and people critical of their regime. So that's why that's a dangerous idea. Well, so fast forward over the decades, in the 60s and 70s, the civil rights movement, was heavily focused on free speech. And so you recall the UC Berkeley free speech movement in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Free speech was always a liberal cause, a very progressive cause. It's the foundation of all the other rights, because if you can't speak your mind, then to argue for other rights, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, animal rights, children's rights, and so on, you have to articulate the arguments to convince other people to accept your arguments, right? So that requires free thought and free speech. But something weird has happened in the last maybe 20 years or so. There's been something of a reversal, wherein now conservatives are defending free speech and liberals are calling for censorship. So when I saw this happening, I thought, what in the world is going on here? This is crazy. So I tracked some of that history in the book that, starting back at that time in the 60s and 70s in the civil rights movement, language matters, and the way you talk about other people publicly matters, because it changes the way people think about other people. The obvious example being using the N-word to describe African Americans, or the C word to describe women, or calling Jews kikes or Asians gooks, or whatever. Those are hurtful. I mean, I wouldn't use those words, and it's pretty obvious why we shouldn't use those words. And we're all pretty familiar with why we shouldn't. Okay, we've all inculcated that, even though those words are very time context dependent. If you could, as Richard Dawkins points out, you can identify when a novel was written down to the decade by the language that the authors used to describe Jews and blacks and women and so forth, minorities. And some of it's pretty painful to read. Like, God, I can't believe they were talking about women that way, or blacks that way, or whatever. So we've all kind of had our consciousness raised, our moral sphere expanded, and we don't talk about people that are now considered members of our in-group and so on. But so you take that concept of, words matter, to words are dangerous and threatening, to words are violence. And therefore, not only would I suggest you personally not use those words, and I won't, and I'll say I'm not going to use them. That's a different thing from, and the government is going to censor you if you use those words, or the university is going to kick you out or silence you, or whatever. That's a different thing. Words are not violence. They're not the same, right? So I do not hold David Icke accountable, morally culpable, for saying that 5G causes COVID-19, and therefore some nut jobs went out and firebombed a few of these 5G towers in England, 3 different cities. So, the argument is, well, he's responsible. No, he's not responsible. The people that did it are responsible, right? So crimes against property are already illegal. We don't have to make the words that people use that lead people to commit crimes. Just convict the people that did the crimes. Don't worry about they're just words. They're not violence, right? So, and I would apply that to anything. The words are not violence, and the violence that people commit, they have to be held accountable for that. And for that, you have to have some belief in free will or volition of some kind, that people are not automaton. They hear the word and they're like Manchurian candidates, hypnotized, and they go off and assassinate the president because they were hypnotized, whatever. That they have to be held accountable. Okay. Anyway, then some of the examples I use in the book of people that I listen to that I don't agree with. I have a chapter on David Irving and the Holocaust deniers. He's kind of the top guy and smartest, best writer, most influential. And I actually, even though I debunked him in Skeptic magazine, I wrote a whole book called Denying History, in which we lined up all their arguments and showed why they're wrong. I have a chapter on David Irving in there, why he's wrong. and so forth. But I actually wrote a letter on his behalf to the judge in his trial in Austria to let him out of jail. What did he do? He showed up at the airport in Vienna. And when his passport was scanned at the airport, they said, bah, this is David Irving. He's a dangerous Holocaust denier. We can't let him in the country. What? Yeah, in Austria and Germany, as you know, and France, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, it's illegal to deny the Holocaust. Okay, I find this absurd, even though I think the Holocaust deniers are, wrong, ridiculous, atrociously wrong. But they should be able to have their say. Why not? To me, arresting David Irving at an airport, this is like convicted for a thought crime. He was just thinking about giving a speech. That's a crime. Now, look, he's probably going to go and go to some little hotel. There's probably a little hotel conference room of 12 people or something. This is what we're talking about. We're not talking about, he's filling a stadium of 100,000 people and sending them out. We're talking about, pretty much nothing. And, if you really want to harm somebody like that, just ignore them. That's what they hate more than anything else, is to be ignored. It's like when Milo Yiannopoulos was running around America giving speeches and kind of inflaming, the libtards. We're going to own the libtards and the snowflakes at the college campuses, but the students, he just owned them. They just fell for his rhetoric. He just manipulated them. And I was tweeting like mad, like, students, just ignore this guy. As a public speaker, I can tell you there is nothing worse than a half empty room, other than a completely empty room. Right? It's so disheartening to think no one really cares what I have to say. Much better for people like Milo is, a room full of people, of screaming students and holding up their banners and posters, protesting him and so on. They eat that up, right? Because they think, well, I must really be onto something if they're so scared of me. But if people ignore you, then that's pretty much the end of the game, right? So don't lock up David Irving. Just either refute him like I did, or just ignore him. Okay, so and that leads me to this larger idea of hate speech, because that's the umbrella under which Holocaust denial is. It's hate speech because it's inflammatory, it's threatening, it's under that clear and present danger. Somebody listening to nothing of a lecture, reading some pamphlet, is going to therefore do something to Jews in Canada or wherever, and that's the argument. But the problem is again, those actions against minority groups that are hate crimes, damaging of personal property or actually harming somebody, those are already crimes that for which they can and should be convicted. Somebody just saying something bad or saying something critical that leads somebody to do something like that, the people uttering the words are not culpable. The person committing the crimes are culpable, and just hold them culpable. Don't worry about the people just using words. All right. So, again, that's just the moment you set up that category, half of everything anybody says could be, considered a clear and present danger. It's like the analogy I use is, let's say I'm a historian and I'm studying the history of Native Americans. And this is an actual question. How many Native Americans were there before Columbus came here? And no one knows for sure. There was no census data. Could be 90 million, could be 70 million, could be 50 million. Then how many died, due to germs, guns, and steel? Well, maybe 90%, 80%, something like that. So the number of killed is probably in the many, many tens of millions. But let's say I'm skeptical of that. Let's say I'm a scholar, I'm a historian, I'm a professor at some university, and I go, you know what, the way I read the record, I think it's more like 10 million were killed, not 50 or 60 million. Am I a Holocaust denier? You see where that goes. The moment you set up some category and that somebody who doesn't like the way I've crunched the numbers can say, that Shermer's a racist, he's a bigot, he's a Holocaust denier, he should be fired from his job. And okay, so this is the problem with that. The easy pickings, Holocaust denial, yes, okay, that's a bad thing. We should silence them. Well, what about this and this and this and this? And pretty soon you could find something in anything anybody says that you don't like is a part of that. I also talk in the book about Jordan Peterson and Graham Hancock. So Graham Hancock is a alternative archaeologist, as he calls himself. Archaeologists call him a pseudo-archaeologist, sort of like pseudoscience. And he's not the only one. There's a lot of alternative archaeologists. Most of them are not professionals. They're not trained as scientists in archaeology, but they have different theories. The wackiest ones are that, the aliens built the pyramids. You've probably seen those shows, Ancient Aliens, in which the guy says in every episode, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. And, I'm just asking a few questions here. I'm just curious, could it be, now their arguments are pretty deeply flawed. They're all God of the gaps type arguments. Here's this weird little anomaly on the left paw of the Sphinx that it doesn't, match the theory here. Therefore, built by aliens or whatever. Okay, they're all in that category. Just some anomaly they can't think of the explanation for. Dawkins makes this point about creationism. If creationist says, if you can't explain how natural selection created the left elbow of the spotted green tree frog in Amazon, then the whole theory is false. The theory of evolution is false. No scientist can explain every single thing in their field. There's always anomalies. So what do you do with the anomalies? Nothing. You assign them to graduate students to figure out, or you just keep working on it, right? But for the alternative people, they glom onto those and then create a whole new theory about that. Okay, so that's why it's wrong to do that. It's a kind of an error in logic and also how science actually works. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is we should listen to some of these people because they might come up with something that's interesting. They might challenge the mainstream. Because the fact is, again, no one's omniscient. We're not deities. We don't know everything that happened in the past. And Graham Hancock's theory is not aliens. It's that there was this advanced civilization that lived maybe 30, 40,000 years ago, maybe 100,000 years ago. In any case, tens of thousands of years before the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians and so forth. And he has interesting arguments, mostly that focus on the anomalies. And as he posts on Twitter almost every day, stuff just keeps getting older. And he makes some good points about, this little artifact, this archaeological find here, and there doesn't really add up to what mainstream archaeologists have always been saying. The type specimen here is Göbekli Tepe, this sort of site of monumental architecture in Turkey that's about 11 to 12,000 years old. So here you have what are essentially hunter-gatherers who are alleged to be incapable of creating monumental architecture because they just don't have the numbers. It takes thousands of people to do this. You have to have farming to feed all those workers and so on and so forth. Then how did they do this? Okay. Now Graham thinks, they had guidance from this advanced civilization that lived long before. I don't think that's right, but I do think that mainstream archaeologists have been too dogmatic in how they portray hunter-gatherers, or at the very least, they need to be more open to the idea that maybe these hunter-gatherers could do a lot more than we gave them credit for. The point being that listening to outsiders like Graham Hancock is useful and not harmful, not dangerous. And same thing with Jordan Peterson, who's been super polarizing the last few years. With his Bill C-16, he pushed back against in Canada. And again, it's under this hate speech category that corporations and government agencies and universities cannot discriminate against people and use certain words to describe them. That's a form of hate speech. It's a form of discrimination and so forth. And the Bill C-16 had to do with personal pronouns. Like, I don't want to be Michael Shermer, he. I want to be Michael Shermer, Z. Or Zer, whatever. Okay. Now what Jordan was protesting was not what I personally want to call myself. He doesn't care. I don't care. It's none of my business. But to then say, I'm going to go to the government and I'm going to have them make you call me that. And if you don't, I'm going to sue you, or you're going to be convicted for a hate crime. That's what he was objecting to. And I have to say, I agree with him on that front. To the extent that Bill C-16 would actually end up in that. I'm not sure that it would have, but in principle, it was worth discussing before it was passed and after it was passed and so forth. And so for that, that put Jordan on the map. And then so now we all heard about his ideas about what is truth, pragmatic truth, the sort of Darwinian evolutionary theory of truth. And, he goes on and on for hours about this. And I'm not 100% sure I fully understand what it is he's arguing about Jungian archetypes and Nietzsche and all this, what is truth and literary truth and mythical truths and psychological truths versus empirical scientific truths. So I wrote a chapter in the book on Jordan because I really like Jordan and he's a super smart guy. I'm pretty sure I disagree with him pretty strongly about truth and science and what we're talking about here, assuming I understand what he's talking about. I tried to read his books and the maps of meaning is, it was really difficult. It was like 30 hours long on audio and I got through about 6 hours and I threw in the towel. I just couldn't take it anymore. It's just, losing my train of, anyway, that's another story. But that somebody like that is so famous and was filling theaters of thousands of people that came to hear him. I went to several of his talks and clearly he has a message for people that resonates that we should at least pay attention to, and that it's okay to talk to Jordan Peterson. It doesn't make you a racist, a bigot, a misogynist, or much less Hitler. I don't know if you know this phrase, reductio ad Hitlerum. Sorry for your country to have to be associated with that all the time, but it's basically that every argument, the moment Hitler comes up, the argument's over, the conversation's over. Trump is Hitler, and everybody's Hitler that you don't like. Okay, that's worthless for conversation. And of course, poor Jordan got accused of all those sorts of things, and I just think that's wrong. I mean, those are the kind of people we should be listening to. Now, you don't have to pay attention to everybody. There's a lot of really weird people out there, I know, because what I do for a living is studying them. But nevertheless, those that are drawing a big audience that people seem to be very interested in, they're having some kind of influence in culture. I think we are obligated to test their ideas in the marketplace of ideas and see if there's anything to them. So like at Skeptic magazine, see, it's right there in my, so we have Steve Pinker on the cover there. That was our last issue on, are we living in a post-truth world? The answer is no. And so, engaging in those topics, like we ignored the flat earthers, for decades because I think there were 2 members, and then the head guy died in the late 90s. So it's like, well, there's no point. No one believes in the flat earth. They're not getting any attention. But then in the last couple of years, all of a sudden, there's the Flat Earth Society and the Flat Earth conferences and Flat Earth T-shirts and websites. And, all of a sudden people on social media are talking about it and celebrities are endorsing it, or maybe they were punking this. I don't know. But in any case, we finally did an issue on the flat earthers. 1, who says the earth is not flat and why do they say it? What are their motives? And 2, what are their actual arguments? And can you explain how we know the earth is not flat? And much less, how do you know that the earth goes around the sun and not vice versa? Turns out when you ask people this, most people cannot articulate the reasons. And it's an interesting problem in cognitive psychology. If you ask people, explain, do you know how a zipper works? Oh yeah, of course. Explain how a zipper works. Well, or explain how a toilet works, a flush toilet. Well, it just flushes it. No. What about the pipe? Or people that sound off about immigration, or let's say some trade deal. Obama wants to do this trade deal with Canada and Mexico, and I'm against it. What is it that Obama's trade deal entails? I don't know. Or Medicare. What's the Obamacare? What is he actually saying? I don't know. And so we know from recent studies that knowledge of a particular subject is not a predictor of whether people accept it or reject it. So climate science, for example, people that accept climate science turn out their knowledge of climate science is no better than the deniers. That is to say, most of us don't know much about climate science. It's a technical science, and because I publish a magazine, people send me technical articles in climate science, pro and against. And I can't say that I understand them. These are technical fields, computer modeling and mathematics and all this stuff that I'm not trained in. So when I say I accept climate science, in a way, I'm just signaling I acknowledge that the scientific community works in a way that drives toward the truth and understanding of the real world, and that they check themselves. And they have kind of a competition in the marketplace of ideas within their little field, and they try to debunk each other and challenge each other, fact check each other, peer review and all that. So that by the time it trickles down to me in the popular science media, I think, well, okay, I guess they have a consensus. I'm going to accept it because I know how science works. I have confidence that it's working. If the whole thing shifts, then I'll change my mind. But, I can't check everything on these things, much less quantum physics or stuff like that I know nothing about. So when deniers say, I don't accept climate change, well, they don't know anything more either. But they're signaling to their tribe, those climate science people, they're all liberals. They're a bunch of lefties. That Al Gore film, An Inconvenient Truth, he was vice president for 8 years. It's a liberal cause. And I'm a conservative, therefore I'm against it. So in both cases, what people are doing is they're signaling to their tribe, I acknowledge the value of science, or I'm skeptical of science because it's a liberal thing or whatever. It's more of a political tribalism. And, that's an interesting, disturbing finding of cognitive science of late. But to combat it, then, is there anything we could do in terms of science education? Yes, there is. That is, you need to decouple the scientific idea from the politics surrounding it or religion. So like in creationism, for example, if my analogy is, if you give people a choice between Darwin and Jesus to a Christian, they're not picking Darwin. Okay. Darwin's not their savior, right? Jesus is offering them everlasting life and forgiveness and redemption and all that stuff. Okay. So you need to take Jesus off the table. So I make the argument, like, you can keep your religion. Maybe evolution was the way God created the diversity of life, much like people in Newton's time accepted gravity as the way that God created solar systems and planets and so forth. That, God set, sort of a deist argument, that God set up the universe like a clockwork. He established all these laws of nature. Boom, the thing goes off and running. Maybe he has to stir the particles once in a while to keep it going. And this is the argument Darwin made in a later edition of The Origin of Species, because people were saying, you've killed God, Darwin. He's like, no, why? Why would that be the case? In the same way that people in Newton's time said that, that's how God created solar systems. Why can't evolution be the way God created life? Okay. So I make that argument, and then I'll cite somebody like Francis Collins, head of the National Institutes of Health here in the United States. He's an evangelical born-again Christian, totally into it. Found Jesus on a hike in the frozen waterfall, and there he is, had his revelation. Okay, whatever. But he's head of the National Science Institute, National Institute of Health. He's written a book that is one of the best explanations of the theory of evolution I've ever read. I mean, it's as good as like what Dawkins has written. Maybe not as literary, but just as a straightforward explanation. He accepts all of science, all of it. And so I'll point to the Christian I'm talking to going, hey, this guy is on your team and he accepts the science. You see what I'm doing there is saying, let's just take the religion off the table. You don't have to give up anything. Because if you ask somebody to give up one of their core beliefs that they define themselves by to accept some little scientific theory or whatever, they're not going to do it, right? And same thing when I'm talking to conservatives about climate science, I'll say something like, I'm a big pro-free market capitalism guy, free trade. I love all that stuff. It's great. It's lifted humanity out of poverty and so on and so forth. And by the way, climate science is real, human caused, and we need to do something about it. And you can make a fortune in green technology like Elon Musk. You can be the next Elon Musk. Okay. It's a strategy. I'm just saying to them, you should accept the science. It's not going to take away your core beliefs about free enterprise and so forth. Okay. So the strategy is tipping, again, this deeper cognition that, our brains or minds, whatever, didn't evolve to understand truth so much as defend arguments that are kind of tribal, or this is what we believe, or this is, our unified set of beliefs, and I'm defending them to show I'm a good tribal member and so on. Okay. Anyway, I think I've gone on long enough there. I do have a few other fun chapters in here. I wrote one on governing Mars. It's sort of a one-way debate with Elon Musk I had, in which I had asked him on social media, we're about to colonize Mars. What kind of government are you going to set up there? And, he tweeted back, a direct democracy. And then I pointed out that, that's been tried and it doesn't work with big numbers because you end up with kind of a mob psychology and sort of mass hysteria running the country. Anyway, then so I spent some time exploring ideas of what we've learned on the blue planet on governance that we could take to the red planet. So that was kind of fun, although I don't want to commit too much to any one idea, because it's possible that somebody starting over completely will come up with something new as governance, a different political economy, and so forth, that no one's thought of here. And, I've often fantasized about it, making contact with extraterrestrials that are thousands or millions of years ahead of us, and them saying, "Oh, democracy! Oh, we tried that, and we came up with a better idea after 10,000 years. Here it is." Oh, never thought of that. Anyway, so and then I had a couple of big topics about why there is something rather than nothing, and how we can find meaning and purpose in life through science, and also especially the subtitle is Reflections of a Scientific Humanist. By scientific humanist, I mean that humanism, it's not just a pushback against religion. It's a set of doctrines, I think, that we can defend on their own, grounded in science and rationality, or science and philosophy, or whatever word you want to use. That is to say, it's always bothered me that religion has kind of had a monopoly on morals and meaning. Right. This is kind of Stephen Jay Gould's idea of non-overlapping magisteria, NOMA. Science has its magisteria and religion has its magisteria, and we should keep them separate. And why should religion shouldn't be mucking around in studying the scientific natural world, because it doesn't do that very well, and science does. And science shouldn't be mucking around in morals and meanings, because that's what religion does. But as Dawkins says, why turn it over to the theologians? Why not the plumber? I mean, why would a theologian have any better training in thinking about the great, moral and meaning questions in life than scientists? And so I do kind of hit head on the so-called naturalistic fallacy. You can't derive an ought from an is. Maybe technically I'm unable to do that. I mean, if Hume, who's smarter than pretty much anyone who ever lived, couldn't do it, then who am I? But I don't care about that. My point is that we've given religion too much leeway for having the sole voice on those questions, that scientists can say something about it. That is to say, understanding human nature, what we need to live moral and meaningful lives. We can discover certain things from the study of human nature, human society, and culture. There is a legitimate field of evolutionary ethics, kind of applying Darwinian thinking to moral questions. And even if you can't derive all values from facts, at least you can derive some, or at least inform your moral decisions based on facts. And so that's what I'm trying to do in that book. So I think I'll end there and open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was thoroughly enjoyable. So I think we've really got lots and lots of questions for you. Davina, are you ready?
Forward to
Oh, now we can hear you.
Ah, right. I was just saying I am indeed ready, and I'm really looking forward to asking these questions and hearing Michael's answers. So let's
Michael,
get started.
are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go. Yep.
Brilliant. In that case, why don't we start with one of the questions that's actually been asked several times, and that is on the matter of free speech. Do you think that there are any boundaries that perhaps should not be crossed in which, pardon, sorry, my screen moved. So do you think that there are any particular boundaries that should not under any circumstances be crossed, or do you think that really everything goes? So people are asking, what about people who insult others or who actually do use their words to cause havoc, and this quite deliberately?
Yeah. Well, there are laws in place for libel, for example. You can't tell lies about somebody else in which they then suffer harm. That is, they lose income or something along those lines. Now, in America, if you charge somebody with libel, that is, you sue them for libel, the burden is on you to prove that they harmed you, and that includes having to show, say, loss of income. In England, it's interesting. It's the opposite. That the burden of proof is in the other direction, and that's much harder to prove that you didn't, libel somebody. Anyway, collecting on those sorts of things is hard. I do think libeling other people is wrong, but that's it's a slightly different form of speech. It's lying with the intention of harming somebody. So there, I guess I would agree. That's a restriction. The other area, I would say something like giving the nuclear codes to the Russians, say something like that. So you do have this gray area of like WikiLeaks. To what extent did Ed Snowden releasing all these classified documents put into danger sort of our foreign spies and soldiers and so on? There, I have to agree. That's a debatable point there.
It certainly is, but specifically coming back to free speech, perhaps on a more day-to-day level between, the persons surrounding us in our cities, in our towns, it's often very, very different because rather than perhaps with large matters such as WikiLeaks, and it impacts us very differently. I mean, someone might, I don't know, insult someone to the point of tears while without breaking laws. But at the same time, perhaps they're using very specific characteristics. What do we do there?
Yeah, there. My response is, the solution to hate speech is more speech. So just tell the person, you know what, that was really a hurtful thing to say that just, really upset me. And I'd like to know why you did it, or, and give the person a chance to apologize. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they're clueless, they could be on the spectrum or something. Who knows? They're just, not sensitive to other people's feelings or something like that. This gets back to that personal pronoun thing. If you ask me personally, please call me this or whatever, of course I'm going to do that. The analogy I used when I was in college, I had a roommate, his name was Dwayne, and he hated his name. And one day he announced that he changed his name to D'Artagnan, the fourth musketeer of the three musketeers, D'Artagnan. And it's like, what? D'Artagnan? He goes, yeah. And you can just shorten it. Call me Dar. I'm like, okay. And a bunch of us said, yeah, okay. So, and he changed it on his driver's license and so forth. But that's a personal thing that, of course, don't be a dick, just, be a decent person and, do that. But that, of course, is different than, having the law or having some institution enforce that. The other problem with institutions jumping in like that is it leads people to push back. Maybe you're going to force me to do that. In that case, I'm not going to do it, as opposed to personally asking somebody like that.
That's true. But that does then bring us to questions which people have also been asking, such as the role of government, for instance, if political parties actually are actively going against the Constitution or speaking against the Constitution. Here in Germany, I could certainly think of one or two examples, but it's a hotly debated topic. Should they then be tolerated by the government? And if they are, doesn't that then bring up the paradox of tolerance? And, well, what do we do then?
Yeah, the paradox of tolerance, right? That's Karl Popper's open society problem. The problem, my first response to that is, historically, that almost never happens. That is to say, the moment you tolerate the intolerant people get a toehold, and eventually they come to power. They control all the reins of communications, like the media and press and so on. And they silence people and lock them up and send them into prison camps. Okay, so of course the obvious example is the Nazi regime, but those are few and far between in the last, say, century, and there's very, very few of them now. North Korea, maybe Iran, just a handful of others that do that. But we've pretty much put a lid on those kinds of actions. If you're talking in Germany about maybe
I have to disagree there, actually. I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree there. I mean, looking at our societies, I mean, obviously I am predominantly speaking about Germany, but I and most of our audience follow what happens in the US as well. And in actual fact, these sorts of things do happen. The hotly debated term Islamophobia was quite specifically introduced by organizations that have been funded by, you know, places like Saudi, by the Turkish government, so very, very controversial organizations, religious authorities. And these terms were actually deliberately introduced to sway the dialogue. And in actual fact, what's happening is that because of terms like this, people are afraid to criticize. And it is actually a form of the tolerance paradox coming into action. So we want everyone to feel welcome here, of course, and live a peaceful, happy life here. But that has also led to situations and subcultures that are actually very, very damaging. And in actual fact, in order to counter them, we would have to be intolerant. So we are now the intolerant ones. And the people we tolerated are even less tolerant of our liberal society. And this is something you can see in many places. It doesn't have to be on a large scale with the government being the ones that are doing this. It can happen through society.
Yeah, that's a good argument. I guess my response to that would be, of course, we're not attacking the people, we're attacking ideas. We're just talking about ideas. You know, so Islam, what are its ideas? Which ones do we find acceptable for a liberal society and which are not, regardless of who holds them? Okay, so we have to get off the focus on people and return it to ideas. Now, in terms of the origins of the word Islamophobia, I'm actually not familiar with that. So when you said, did you say it was kind of leaked into the culture from Saudi states?
Yeah, there are several. Well, here in mainland Europe, we have several organizations that are funded by various governments. So here in Germany, for instance, we have DTIB, which is actually the German part of the Turkish Religious Authority. You know, there are very people, I definitely can't say if it was them specifically. I have several names floating around my mind right now. But in actual fact, you know, there have been open discussions about these terminologies. I mean, it's an open secret. It's all documented. And you can really see it. And you can see how organizations systematically do this to further their agenda. And that is a form of it as well. Well, not just organizations, groups of people.
Yeah. But that's a way of silencing critics, is by calling them Islamophobes, just like, So but counter that by just pushing back, just saying, I'm not as Islamophobe. I'm critical of the ideas, not the people. I mean, that's all you could do in terms of dialogue and communication, is just push back and just say, no, I'm not a racist. I'm not a homophobe. I'm not a Islamophobe or whatever. You know, those are just distractions. Let's just talk about the ideas. Now, that's hard to do because, again, our culture is so focused on words and language and policing them. But in any case, the moment you bring in the idea of like the government and its interactions with political parties, you know, who's going to make those decisions about, let's say your issue on immigration, your position on immigration is, you know, a standard deviation out from the mainstream. You know, you think only, you know, like 1% should be allowed in, or, you know, have a super strict immigration program like Japan, say, something like that. Why is that wrong to make that argument? Even if, you know, you think it should be 5% and I think it should be 10% and somebody else thinks it should be 20%. Where's the line and who makes that decision?
Yeah,
well, we do at the voting.
That's a difficult one, but the actual question was quite specifically if, for instance, a political party is actually actively going against things that are written in your constitution, or they hold perhaps views in their party manifest that says that are actually in conflict with parts of the constitution. What then?
How do they even become legitimate political parties in the first place then? I mean, you have to register, right? You have to register with the government, you know, and so, I mean, in Germany, they could not form a Nazi party. That's illegal, so that can never happen. I guess you call it something else and carry some of the planks of the platform.
That's like precisely what we have here. That is precisely what we have, and there are several. Well, there are certain far-right parties where there have actually been moves to have them banned. But perhaps we should come back to the questions, because I think we're going down a rabbit hole here. In terms of the people that are perhaps hindering free speech and the voicing of free speech, do you think there's, well, you mentioned it earlier, that you're noticing this coming in particular from liberals, and that there's been this swap between the conservatives and the liberals for these views. Do you have any ideas about why or what the causes of this could be?
Yeah, as I mentioned, you know, it's sort of a derivative of the civil rights movement in the first place, about being sensitive to language, which we should be. But let's say, I remember in the 80s and 90s when conservatives were obsessing about rock lyrics and how this was, you know, corrupting the youth and leading them to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And, you know, you had people like Frank Zappa, you know, in Congress defending rock lyrics as a form of free speech and expression, or go a little later with Madonna's videos, for example, because, you know, she was Catholic, so she was pretty ex-Catholic, so pretty irreligious with her videos. And, you know, it was conservatives going crazy about that sort of thing, or pornography and prostitution and whatnot. You know, now it's something of a reversal of that, where you see liberals defending, you know, the censorship of dangerous ideas in the same way the conservatives do. I guess my point is that, at least here in America, what's bothered me is to tune on Fox News and to see, you know, these right-wing nut jobs like Sean Hannity defending free speech. And I'm like, oh my God, how did this happen? You know, that's kind of what led me to be worried about that.
Following on from that, we have obviously lots more questions, and we have here a question asking some university campus groups of the Giordano-Bruno Foundation have been attacked and even expelled from student parliament activities because of their links to the evolutionary humanist manifesto of Michael Schmidt-Salomon. And their speaker invitations to ex-Muslim advocates like Hamed Abdel Samad. And yes, so this lady is asking, in the chapter What Went Wrong, you write that you have no magic bullet solution for these anti-free thought and anti-free speech problems in the Western academic world, but could you please extend on your key takeaways?
Yeah, there, I don't know that particular example, but here, like the deplatforming of speakers that I briefly mentioned, or the silencing of people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who in my mind should be one of the great champions of the 21st century civil rights movement, women's rights movement. But because she was critical of Islam, back to this Islamophobic thing, you know, she's considered an Islamophobe, and that's a form of bigotry and hatred and racism and so on. You know, here, this was her religion. You know, she is a person of color, a woman who was a victim of female genital mutilation, speaking out on behalf of women. And she is silenced. I mean, the most famous case here was she was invited to give the graduation speech and receive an honorary doctorate at Columbia University. Columbia University has long been a champion of civil rights. You know, it was because it grew because of the anti-Semitism in the 30s and 40s, that Jews couldn't get into Harvard and Yale and Princeton and so forth. They had quotas, you know, so Columbia University brought them in, and now they're kicking out someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali. So first of all, that's ridiculous. And second of all, the Wall Street Journal printed her speech. So instead of a couple thousand people at graduation, fortunately, what it does do is that it causes people to self-censor. That is, like, for example, every semester I ask my students at Chapman, how many of you self-censor on sensitive issues like race or abortion, immigration, and so on? They all raise their hand. They're all afraid to speak out, even in class with their fellow students sitting there. They're afraid they're going to get canceled and shamed on social media and so on. That's a silencing effect that has nothing to do with the government, but it's just what happens when you go down that road.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, there's so many. There are so many more things we could discuss going down this subject. However, we have more questions. So
okay.
This is on a very different matter. One of the viewers would like to know whether you could explain how you came to the conclusion that climate change is real. And is that an example of when you were listening to the other side?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question, and that is exactly what happened. Just to give some background perspective, when I was in college in the early to late 70s, the ecological movement was just getting founded, the environmental movement was just taking off. And there were a lot of doomsday predictions. Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb was just the first of them. There was a bunch of them. The Club of Rome issuing this, statement of all the precious resources that we're going to run out of, and peak oil was going to happen. We're not going to have fossil fuels anymore, natural gas, and so on and so forth. The rainforest would all be gone, and billions of people would starve to death. And by the 90s, none of this happened. And I thought, I'm kind of skeptical I was already skeptical of doomsdayers anyway, of the religious kind. And I thought maybe this liberalism stuff is a kind of faux religion in the doomsday sense, but then I have to admit, I didn't see Al Gore's movie. I saw Al Gore give that speech before the movie came out at TED. And, he had the whole thing with the slides and the cherry picker that he had to take to get up to the top to show where the parts per million of greenhouse gases was. It was great, and he was funny. You would not believe this Al Gore. He was not that stiff wooden presidential candidate. He was like doing shtick on stage. It's great. We were all like, where was this guy when he was campaigning? Anyway, I thought, you know what? I know this guy's a liberal and people are going to be skeptical of that, but I'm going to just read the articles myself. So I did. So I ended up in writing an article in Scientific American saying I flipped, and this is why. Boom, 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 boom. And that's only been reinforced ever since. And a lot of other people, including some of my libertarian friends, they've also flipped simply because they followed the data. Now, I know the models are complex and there's error bar margins, and so forth. But what really convinces me is the same thing that convinced me about evolution was what's called consilience of inductions, or a convergence of evidence from independent lines of inquiry. So it's not like these scientists are all meeting on the weekends to get their story straight, right? So that we can take over and conquer America and free enterprise and turn it into a socialistic nation, because that's our secret agenda. No, I mean, these are scientists. They don't know each other. They work in different fields. One guy works on clouds, another one works on glaciers, someone works on butterflies, and temperatures and whatever. There's 100 different fields, and they all converge to the same conclusion. It's the same thing with evolutionary biology. There's a bunch of different independent fields, and they all come to the same conclusion. So that strengthens our confidence that the science is real, the conclusion is real. Now, I'll also concede that, what we do about it, the moment you shift into kind of politics and economics, okay, there's room for debate there. Should we have a carbon tax? How much should carbon tax be? And so on. That's all good for what democracies do.
Yeah, so that was a really brilliant example of, doing as a skeptic should do. So hearing the information, learning and adapting one's views. So are there any other perhaps major themes where you perhaps held one view and were confronted with something completely different and changed your mind? Would you care perhaps give us a few more examples?
Guns.
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 Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have a couple chapters in the book on guns because, you know, when I was growing up, my stepfather had guns. We went hunting all the time, shotguns, and then, you know, then in my 20s I had a pistol and I'd shoot it at the range once in a while, whatever. And because I was in my 20s anyway, kind of a libertarian, so I was like, yeah, guns are good, you know, pro free guns and all that stuff. You know, but then when I started thinking about it from a social science perspective, that is to say, there's a problem here. We have carnage. You know, gun deaths are about the same as automobile deaths. And we have worked for decades on reducing the carnage on American highways. Seat belts and airbags and safety strips and the rumble strips on the side of the road and on and on and on. And, you know, we reduced the number of deaths per miles driven, which is, you know, billions a year, you know, by quite a bit. And so why can't we do that with guns? And it turns out, I've discovered when I started looking into it, that for a lot of conservatives, guns are something of a totemic proxy for freedom and autonomy or liberty or whatever words you want to use. And they don't treat it as like a public health epidemic. You know, 35,000 people die a year of guns. You know, we need to do something about it. They wouldn't care if it was 350,000 people died a year, or 3.5 million died a year of guns. They don't care. You know, I want my guns, you know, and it's not that it isn't the gun, it's what it represents. So anyway, I have chapters about my debates and what the arguments are on each side and why I switched to thinking, yeah, we need some gun control. Now, interestingly, in the reviews of my book, reviews in Europe are like, seriously, why is anybody even talking about this? These Americans are out of their minds. What is it about guns in America? And my American reviewers are like, he is so wrong about this.
I do have to admit, when I read the chapter on guns, I did do the exact European thing, and I turned around to my friend who was nearby, and it was the same thing. What is it with America and the guns? I just don't understand. But I do have to say that your argument on what to do in the States actually gave me food for thought. So you never know. I'm guessing you gave a lot of other Europeans food for thought as well.
Well, my wife is from Cologne.
Yes.
And so she was baffled by this too, as well as all the documentaries on Hitler on American television. And she's like, how can you guys be obsessed with this guy? We got over him decades ago.
Pretty much. Now, here is a question on something completely different. We have someone asking, isn't the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster giving the devil his due, as you do not mention the church in your book at all? Do you have any good scientific advice for the church for the next 100 years? And this is from Joseph Capellini, who is the president of the consistory.
Okay. As I understand it, there was a split in the church between the flat noodles and the round noodles, which is the true noodly savior. Yeah, I love the Flying Spaghetti Monster. I thought it was hilarious because I do think as a deeper principle that humor is a good way to deal with controversial subjects like religion and politics. I mean, if you look at the humorists in the, say, 50s and 60s of how they helped pioneer civil rights by using humor, you know, like Charlie Chaplin making fun of dictators, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think, the kind of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens approach to religion, which is kind of a pit bull, take it by the throat and strangle it aggressively. That's one approach. It works for some people. I think a softer approach, it also works and more conciliatory. And then humor. You know, I think you take someone like Julia Sweeney is my type specimen. She was a Saturday Night Live comedian in the 90s, and she wrote this monologue called Letting Go of God, and about how her journey from Catholicism to atheism. But it's hilarious. I mean, I've had people that are just deeply religious watch it, and they are in stitches laughing, and they get the point. You know, whereas if they read Richard or maybe me, you know, they might find it offensive, the way we attack their arguments. You know, here's their 6 arguments and here's why they're wrong. Therefore, they're idiots to believe. Well, like Julia, it just makes it funny. You end up laughing with her. And then at the end, you go, huh, that was a pretty good point. So I think humor is good. So I love the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
Excellent. So we have another question, seeing as you have so many books behind you, it's rather fitting. How do your routines around learning and teaching, well, what do they look like? How do you manage to do all the reading, preparing your podcast, the teaching, the writing, and how do you keep on top of and just remember all that information?
Well, that's a good question. Well, so first of all, I've been doing this, since I was in college. I've been interested in ideas and talking about ideas and reading. I consume a lot of audio content, actually. I live in California, so we drive a lot, as you know, and then I also ride my bike a lot, a couple hours a day, 2 to 3 hours a day. I'm either hiking with my dog or riding my bike. So that's a great opportunity to just plug in the earbuds and turn on an audiobook. Like I just finished this audiobook because I have this author as my guest today, Gerald Posner, in his book Pharma. Look at this baby. All right, that was like 20 hours, but I can knock off 20 hours in less than a week, of audio content. So I consume a couple books a week, actually, through audio. And especially now that we're all in isolation, there's not much else to do. In terms of writing books, I've written 13 books. 4 of them are essay collections, like Giving the Devil His Due, and the other 9 are actual books, just original written. And but I've been doing this since my 20s, and I'm 65. So like that's nothing compared to someone like Isaac Asimov, who and pumped out like 400 books, or someone like a Stephen King. They write like 6 hours a day. I write maybe an hour or 2 a day. So it's not that much. And if you just think about it, if you're not a writer, it seems like a lot, but if that's your job and that's all you do, well, it accumulates.
Yes.
Mainly though, the deeper point is the deeper point is that I enjoy it.
That's the real secret.
If you find something you really enjoy doing, it isn't work. It's just like I call this a lottery test. If Elon Musk sent me a check for $20 million tomorrow, first of all, I'd thank him very much, and I'd buy 2 more of his cars. but I'd be doing exactly what I'm doing. I mean, nothing would change really.
Right. Speaking of Elon Musk, we have a question on your chapter on governing Mars. And since you quoted Elon Musk and Thomas Jefferson, as well as some science fiction authors, and at the end you propose a preamble to the Martian Constitution. In your view, what provisions and safeguards should the Constitution entail? And do you think that the process of elaborating a Martian Constitution could have an impact on revising constitutions on Earth? And if so, how?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I actually hadn't really thought about that, how it would come back the other direction. That could take a while. Although Kim Stanley Robinson wrote in his Mars trilogy, ends up with something like that, where the immigrants to Mars are these awful Earthlings that want to, ruin our economy or whatever, because they've created a much better society. So I guess you could just take it from there back to Earth, something like that. I think of governance as experiments. I got this idea actually from Carl Sagan in I think the last chapter of Demon Haunted World. He talks about social experiments, like 50 different states in the United States have 50 different constitutions, different tax laws, different gun control laws, and so forth. And so the outcome of those are a form of data. Like we can look at that and see what the effects are. Like just taking the gun control debate, should you have carry and conceal laws or not, right? Well, you can look at the different states that have them, their gun violence rates and so forth, and try to draw some conclusions from that. And I see democracies as like that. There's a lot of different kinds of democracies, and they're all slightly different, and you can see what the outcome is. Or what we're going through now, should you be like Sweden and kind of just keep things open and hope the COVID pandemic, sort of passes not too harmfully? Or are you more like the United States or South Korea, where you lock things down? Or are you more like Germany, who seems to have threaded the needle, as far as I can tell, closing down around the right time and now reopening, which looks to be around the right time? I suppose that could turn around if you have a relapse of cases. But the larger point is those are all experiments.
Yes, they are.
And we can look at them and go, let's see what happened. And then learn from them. I could see something like that happening with Mars colonies or whatever.
Do you really think that we as human beings, as wider societies, will actually learn from them? I mean, there is this notion of history constantly repeating itself and people not really learning. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think we have learned a lot. I mean, if you just look at I wrote a book about that, the moral arc, and following Steve Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature, that we have been doing something right more and more over the centuries. Again, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, lots of exceptions of bad things that happen, but we're learning in the sense that, say, for example, the abolition of slavery, the abolition of torture, women's rights to vote, those things are not going to go in reverse. No one's going to make the argument, we should bring slavery back, or we should take the vote away from women. No one's going to make that argument, because those arguments were made before and lost, and the other side won. And we learned, this is actually a better way to structure a society. And while you may have some apparent reversals, like we're going to tighten up the borders and reduce immigration or something like that, those kinds of debates will go back and forth. And, maybe we'll learn something, and tweak it here and there. But on the big issues, we have really learned. The other thing we've learned is the principle of interchangeable perspectives. That is to say, what is it like to be you? And I can't appeal to you to take my interests seriously if I won't take your interests seriously.
True.
That is, there's nothing special about me or the place I happen to be standing, and therefore I can't use that as an argument. Now, that is the kind of argument people used to make. I'm white, therefore I'm special, and you're black, therefore you're not special. You can't make that argument anymore. Those arguments were debunked, right? So we're not going back that direction. We've won that one. So if you look at the great ethical theories, say utilitarianism and its consequentialism approach of Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, or Rawls's just society theory of the veil of ignorance. If we're going to create a law, we have to do it in such a way that I don't know which group I'm going to be in, if I'm going to be male or female or black and white or rich or poor. And therefore the law should be structured in a way that's fair to everybody. Much like the childhood game of, you cut the cake and I'll pick which slice I want. Well, then that ensures that you're going to cut it as close to 50-50 as you can, because you don't know which piece you're going to get, right? Spinoza's viewpoint from nowhere, and so forth. These are all, Peter Singer's expanding moral circle. These are all ways of arguing that we have to treat other people like they're us, because we don't, there's nothing special about my perspective. I have to take somebody else's perspective. That we've been getting much better at as a species over, say, the last 400 years.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned ethics, several people are quite curious as to whether you consider yourself an evolutionary humanist, or is that different to a scientific humanist? And would being one or the other perhaps change your positions?
I'm not sure what the labels mean. I know what I mean by scientific humanist. That is to say, that sort of principle of interchangeable perspectives across all human groups and people, individuals, and even just sentient beings, so animals. That's the future. That's the best argument we have. You can call it secular humanism, Enlightenment humanism, scientific humanism. I'm not sure what evolutionary humanism is unless it incorporates all those, but probably I endorse it.
Excellent. And secularism. Do you think that we, so in this day and age, the old religions are losing in popularity, and some people have the impression that people are replacing them with other things. So a few people have mentioned things like pretty militant veganism or genderism. Right. I'm not sure what you make of that term, but I'm guessing a matter of gender versus sex and so on and so forth. That also leads to whether you think that, as Jonathan Haidt also believes, that there's a lack of viewpoint diversity in the social sciences, and whether these interact. So are they replacement religions? And
well,
let's tackle that first.
That's a good. Yeah, there's a couple issues there. For sure, there's a political bias in the social sciences, and has been since I was in college, and it's really apparent. And to his credit, Jonathan and a couple of his colleagues, who are all liberals, called attention to their colleagues about this, and to the credit of the colleagues, they didn't get that much pushback. It was more like, yeah, you're right. Now, one response is, yeah, you're right, and the bias is there because we're right and the other people are wrong. Okay, so of course the other people don't think that, but I think just calling attention to the problem has helped matters. I do, slowly. I mean, the Heterodox Academy that John founded, has, I don't know, 3,600 members or so. And it's not like anybody can join. You have to be a university professor. So that's a lot. That's a lot of university professors. It's not a fringe group anymore that are pushing back against the kind of woke social justice silencing of anybody that descends from the dogma of the far left. Viewpoint diversity. There's a lot of people that support that. So I think that's good. The other part of the question has to do with the rise of the nuns and the decline of religion.
Yes.
Which has been pervasive in Europe, in European countries since the Second World War. It's been cascading along, and
absolutely.
And I think that's a good thing.
I do too.
My wife and I like to visit cathedrals when we go to Europe because I love the cathedrals. They're beautiful. The dome in Cologne is magnificent. But it would make a great art museum and music hall.
It would make a great restaurant as well.
You could do all of those. It's so big.
Absolutely. And maybe at a hotel as well. Why not?
I saw one in Brussels that had I wanted to visit the cathedral. It was closed and had a sign on the side saying, if you'd like to rent this for corporate parties, it's available. I thought, okay, here's what it's coming to. Now, to me, this is a good thing. Now, the deeper issue some humanists have is, do we need to replace religion with something like a religion, a secular religion? I don't know, because religion's too broad a word. What is it that people need when they go to church on Sunday? Why do they go to church on Sunday or temple or whatever? I think it has mostly to do with social capital. Like, I just want to be around other people that are like me, think like me or whatever. And that's true, bowling, bowling alone and all that stuff, bowling leagues. We need social groups. And also maybe some kind of spiritual element, so maybe the rise of kind of Western Buddhism. You look at people like Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle. They have, just huge following. I went to an event with Deepak, and he's a friend, so he invited me to come to the Shrine Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles with him and Eckhart Tolle. And there was 3,000 people there, and they each paid, I don't know, $100 and something per ticket. I mean, so we're talking about a huge standing only. And this was kind of a typical Hollywood crowd. They're pulling up in their Teslas and their Porsches and so on. They're pretty well dressed, well heeled crowd. I mean, these aren't people like desperately poor and they need religion. They're after something else, some kind of like, I need to find some transcendence or something deeper than my day job, which pays me $2 million a year, and that's just not cutting it. Like, oh boy, I wish I had that problem. But obviously, there is something else that people need that I think humanism could provide, something along the lines of kind of a Buddhist thing, because that's close to a secular religion as we're going to get. They don't have a belief in a Godhead or anything like that. Yeah. Anyway, so maybe meditation is the way. I don't know.
Perhaps. Well, we shall see. Now, even though we've come to that subject, people do keep coming back to the free speech matters. So if it's all right with you, I'll ask you a few more questions in that direction. So here we have one that I think is very interesting, and that is, so alongside the right to free speech, do you think that there should also be the right to anonymous speech? So more and more platforms, well, online platforms these days are requiring phone numbers and such a lot to register, and the entire premise of the big anonymous internet is therefore being changed completely. What do you think about that?
I'm really conflicted about that, because the anonymity does lead people to become really nasty. Much like drivers in LA flipping people off and cursing and yelling and screaming that they would never do if you were on the sidewalk face to face, and Twitter feed, and it's just terrible. It's just a cesspool of hate. I have to say, I hate that. But again, the moment you go down the road as well, we're going to start screening people in a way now that they're private companies. They can do that if they want. They can
Absolutely.
say, to open an account, you have to have a name and address and verify it and so on. Okay. I don't see any problems with that in terms of censorship. I don't think it's a censorship issue. And maybe that would curtail some of the, the Russian bots and all that stuff. Although even there, I would call your attention to Hugo Mercier's new book. Hugo's a cognitive scientist. And his book is called Not Born Yesterday. So he goes against the kind of Danny Kahneman, humans are irrational perspective, that we're actually better skeptics and better at this than at reason and rationality than we think. And that most say political advertising is a complete waste of money and time. People are not swayed by those arguments, that people are not that gullible. They're not easily duped, but of course, you counter with, well, what about people that join cults? Well, but no one's ever joined a cult. They join a group that seems reasonable, right? And so forth. So, I'm not sure how I actually got off on that track from the registering people. Oh, it was the Russian bots. He was saying that research shows that the hacking of the 2016 election by Russia, and particularly all the online bots, had next to no effect. That is to say, this crazy conspiracy theory about Hillary running a pedophile ring out of a pizzeria. Okay. If you believe something like that and I correct you, you're not going to vote for Hillary, because people that believe that, they hated Hillary. So that isn't what swung them over to vote for Trump. That isn't it.
Yes, that's true. And we mustn't forget that people also believe things because they want to believe them. I mean, that makes life so much easier. Now, on the subject of belief, religion in Europe, at least, has, well, actually in the Middle East, many different cultures, now that I think about it, has traditionally been associated with great works of art and magnificent music and such alike. Do you think that scientific humanism has the same potential to inspire great works of art and culture as religion did in the past? And can you think of any good examples for that?
Well, sure. I mean, the Greek and Roman works of art and sculpture and music and poetry and so forth, those weren't inspired by Christianity, as they came way before that.
But they were inspired by their religions.
Well, that's right. So just being inspired is the kind of the common ingredient there. Inspired by something, anything. And to me, nature does that in spades compared to religion. The stage in religion is too small. The magnificence of the cosmos, as we've come to learn it about it through science, has provided much greater inspiration. So, I mean, to me, Carl Sagan is one of the most spiritual people who ever lived. And he was an atheist, or at least an agnostic. And his Cosmos series was a very spiritual, awe-inspiring kind of form of art in a way. And, his widow, Annie Dreen, has kind of kept that dream alive. She's not a scientist. She's more of an artist and poet and writer, and writes these very inspirational scripts for the new series that Neil, hosts. And that, to me, that's just as good as any, medieval painting or music or whatever, just in a different form. And while we're on that thread, I mean, this is sort of like arguing, that how can you say things are getting better when we no longer have a Shakespeare or a Beethoven or a Mozart or a Goethe where are they? This is an argument I've heard when I debate people about progress. They say, the population of the earth today is, like 10 times what it was in Shakespeare's time. Where are the 10 Shakespeares today? Well, they're around, but they do different genres, or, where's the Beethoven? Well, we had Michael Jackson, or the Beatles, or, whoever you want to pick, whoever your favorite artist is.
Lemmy. It's
just a different genre. Yeah. So let's not be too, Euro-focused, say, of that era, as if today's genres are not as good or something like that. So I would say the same thing there. We're kind of focused on the grand works of the Renaissance and early modern period. And, the paintings and music is magnificent, but that's not to say it's better, and that, humanism can't inspire as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. And on the subject of humanism, or rather skepticism, how do one square the need? Forgive me.
It's okay.
So
take your time.
We just have someone asking how one should square the need to be a good skeptic and do one's own fact-checking versus believing a supposed expert or well-informed layman who makes plausible claims, which I think also leads to, why should people read your book and believe what you have to say?
Well, you shouldn't believe what I have to say. You should check it yourself. In other words, you should be skeptical of the skeptics, for sure. I mean, that's kind of what skepticism is all about. So don't take my word for it. But the deeper question, I think, has to do with this issue now we're dealing with of fake news, alternative fact. Are we living in a post-truth world? Again, I point out the cover story we published by Steve Pinker in Skeptic of, where he opens up his article by saying, is the statement we're living in a post-truth world true? So the moment you make an argument about against truth, you're making an argument for truth because you're using arguments. That's a kind of a defense of reason. I want you to take me seriously because I have a set of arguments. Here they are. So you can't then argue that making arguments is worthless because you've just made an argument. Okay, so there is that. Then there's the thing about Hugo Mercier's research showing that most of these kind of crazy alternative fact ideas, they don't hold sway. Most people are not snowed by them. In any case, I've been encouraged by the rise of fact-checking sites, like I mentioned, PolitiFact and Snopes and so forth, since the 2016 election. So again, instead of censoring Trump and his followers, just fact check them, and then just make it available to everybody to know, this is bullshit, and this is a lie, and this is wrong, and this is an exaggeration, and here's the one thing he said that was right, whatever. That to me, more speech is the answer to hate speech and fake news.
Right. We are sadly now coming towards the last few questions. That's such a shame. There are so many here, and I'm sure everyone would love to hear your answers. Let me have a quick look through. There we go. So we have someone asking, what do you think, do you think that it is a problem when religion is taught in schools, and perhaps extending on that, if it is taught in schools, how should it be done?
Right. So here in the United States, we have separation of church and state in the First Amendment. The government cannot favor any one religion. So attempts to teach one particular religion in public schools have always gone down in flames in court cases. Now, I would counter that slightly by saying if you were going to teach religions in a, say, comparative world religions course, or comparative mythologies or history of religion in a department of, say, humanities or social sciences or history, then that would be okay. Because you're not favoring any one religion there. So there's no constitutional violations. And I think it's good for kids to learn what, I put it this way, all the crazy beliefs people have held over the thousands of years. The moment you realize these are contradictory ideas. They can't all be right. And more to the point, they're probably none of them are right in an empirical sense, that they're all just socially constructed, geographically determined, just personal internal beliefs, faith, whatever. I think it would be good for students to know that. In case they're raised at home in one particular religion that is supposedly the one true religion. The moment they see that, well, they all say that, then they will realize, oh, well, that can't be true because they contradict each other. And two, they'll become more tolerant. Now, even if they don't give up their religion, at least they recognize the limitations of their religion, so they're maybe more tolerant of others.
Okay, brilliant. So I personally agree, but obviously this is not about whether I agree with you or not.
Well, then that makes you right.
I like your answer. We have one last question for you, and that is there a story behind the picture of Christopher Hitchens in his office?
Oh, there we go. That's,
in your office, yes. Is there a story behind
so that's,
that?
That was a college artist, I think at Portland State, who was a fan of mine and Hitch. And so he did a picture of Hitch, and the one above it is supposed to be me to whatever extent it looks like that. So I just threw him up there because I'm in my garage, right? This is a home office. So there's my car and, a pile of bicycles over here, right? So, and these books are mostly, well, the ones behind me are mostly my personal library of either my books or other people's books that I really cherish. But I have, in that direction, hundreds and hundreds of books for the podcasts that publishers send me. And so that's the backstory there. I just wall filler.
Yeah, but it's still, people are interested not just in what you have to say, but also about you as a person.
This whole social isolation thing where everybody's doing media interviews from their homes has been an interesting study in what people, first, what's in their homes, and second, what they choose to show or share with people. It's very, very interesting. Do you put your own book back there or not? What about your trophies? I don't have any trophies up or anything like that. So I think, you can overdo it.
True thing. So, unfortunately, that is all we have time for today, which is a shame. I feel like we're just getting started. So thank you so much for answering all the questions. And back to Sophie.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for finishing on time. I didn't even have to warn you, so that's great. Sadly, this concludes our second online salon. And our gratitude goes out, first of all, to all the technicians in our virtual VR3 studio in Düsseldorf for making everything work so marvelously today. Thank you very much. Thanks also to the Giordano-Bruno Foundation and the Düsseldorfer Aufklärungsdienst. And of course, our team. Thank you, Davina. You did a marvelous job. And of course, our two question collectors, Chris and Andrea. Thanks also to the audience for watching and submitting so many great questions. And of course, Michael, thanks so much for taking time out of your day. It was really a pleasure for us all. And I hope you get our present in the mail.
Me too. I can't wait. Because you said wine, something about wine. I'm a wine fan.
Yeah,
that's good.
We have to get it. Well, good night to all of you. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again at our next event. Will be July the 7th with Julia Silberberger, and this time in German again. So thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.